two of the world's greatest Americans gracing the stage in one 8-day period. The guru of the 60s and the guru of the 90s, and Fraser Clark to do the rest of the dirty work tonight.
Hey everybody. I'm not going to spend a lot of time introducing Terence Mckenna. I think we all have an idea of what he is now. He's probably the most adventurous mind on the planet today. I'd just like to say one little thing about the man himself, behind what he talks about. And what I like about Terence is he's not just a philosopher, he's not just an intellectual. The man is a revolutionary and an iconoclast, and he's doing lots of things besides just talking ideas. So that's it. Terence Mckenna. Terence is going to talk for about 1 hour, and then we'll do question and answers. What I'd like you to do is, if you have a question, write it on a piece of paper during the hour, at the end of the hour, and bring it up to an elsewhere. To here, to me up here. I'll be sitting at the back of the stage, so just give me, that way it works a bit more efficiently. Okay. What?
All right. I don't know, do you sit, do you stand, what do you do? Is the sound good? Is the light good? So are you happy to be here? Good. So am I. Well, before I get into the bulk of the lecture tonight, I thought I would just give you some news from the frontier of pharmacology, which is that for the second time in the 20th century, a mega hallucinogen has been discovered that is active in microgram quantities. You got the sound under control back there? Up there? Down there? Good. So, what this is an incredible opportunity for the community, because this compound that is active at 300 micrograms when smoked is not illegal anywhere in the world to grow, to manufacture, to possess, to transport. Okay, we got that straight. Yes, so here is the story. For 45 years, it's been a commonplace of the botanical literature that there was a Mexican plant called Salvia divinorum. Yes. But it was always said that it was either impossible to confirm its hallucinogenic activity, or whatever it was so unstable that it would only persist in the plant a few hours after it was picked. A few years ago, about 5 years ago, an American anthropologist, one of our own, Brett Blosser, went to the Oaxacan mountains and spent some time with the Indians down there, and they showed him how to get off on the plant, the leaf. And he described to me and a number of other people quite extraordinary states of consciousness that were coming from this particular shamanic plant. That's where it rested until about 10 months ago, when an underground chemist in an earthquake-prone city who prefers to remain anonymous set out to actually isolate the constituents of Salvia divinorum. And in short order, he overcame the conventional wisdom and produced a crystalline material active at the microgram range. To check what it was, he purchased a chromatographic standard of a compound called salvorine alpha that had been extracted from this plant 15 years ago. And he smoked that. And the experience was identical. So we now know that there is a new chemical compound in the isoquinoline family that is active in the microgram range that occurs in a plant that looks like Joe plant. It's a house plant. It's a window box plant. It's a relative of the coleus. It grows from Nome to the equator, and it's legal. So, for the first time since the psychedelic issue has been before the community, we have an opportunity to create a psychedelic community that is entirely within the law. No laws need to be changed, and no laws are broken if we avail ourselves of this stuff to manufacture it, to transport it, to use it, to explore it for psychotherapy, to do it on stage, as I'm about to do. No, I'm kidding. I'm kidding. Steady, steady, easy. And this can serve by way of example to point out the fact that there are probably many such plants still to be discovered. The interesting thing about Salvia divinorum is that it's not related to any substance currently illegal. Therefore, the argument that it's a structural relative of something illegal is also fallacious. So, at least in the case of the American government, they will have to present medical and scientific evidence that there is a problem with this compound before it will be possible to make it illegal. This is just one more example, along with ibogaine, phalaris, ayahuasca, so forth and so on, of the way in which the earth itself is stepping in to aid in the agenda of cultural transformation. There are too many doorways in nature that lead to heaven. There are too many paths to the mystery for any institution or social policy to be able to thwart the intent of the human species to evolve. This is part of what this end of millennia cultural transformation is about, a rediscovery of the richness of the gifts of nature. I mentioned ibogaine. Ibogaine is another hallucinogen, a West African plant that induces intense visionary experiences and is now being looked at by the National Institute for Drug Abuse in the United States as possibly a strong contender for being a pharmacological intervention on cocaine and heroin addiction. Imagine how the social understanding of the concept altered state and psychoactive substance would be changed if we discovered that the solution to many of our drug problems are drugs, you see. I mean, I maintain that they were the solution to many of our problems thousands and thousands of years ago, and that it was the creation of societies so constipated, so ego-bound, so hierarchically stratified, that they couldn't tolerate the presence of an ecstatic shamanism as a social phenomenon. It's the rise of those kind of societies that have led us to the brink of planetary catastrophe. So that sort of brings me to my major theme for the evening, or sort of what I wanted to explore with you. I'm interested in the question, is there any reason why smart people should hope? Is there any reason why people of analytical intelligence who are connected up to the facts of the matter about the state of the world should hope? The conventional wisdom is basically no. The smart people who are straight are involved in simply the media management of what has turned into a slow apocalypse, spreading starvation, exacerbated class differences, toxified agriculture, so forth and so on. I don't believe the establishment thinks there are solutions. Their policy is basically the management of panic, which is hardly a forward-moving approach to the adventure of human civilization. So in order to find permission to hope, to believe in something, the first thing you have to do is reconstruct your intellectual model of the universe from the very, very ground up. As long as you're trying to make sense of reality inside the boundaries of the old paradigm, there's no hope. There's no way out of the box of capitalism, monogamy, consumer fetishism, egoism, money worship. No way out. No way. No way out. So what that means is we have to return to first principle. We have to re-understand who we are in the universe, what we are in the universe, and what we mean to it. And in order to do that, we have to, I almost use the word attack, but let's be academic and say provide a critique of science, because this is the world that science built with the henchmen of capitalism and Christianity. But a critique of science that brings it to a new model of reality is the way to open a door to hope. Okay, so can I move back in the light? Is this for the dogs of television? So you can see me. A little guru worship. Bang for your money. A little farther. All right. So here's the deal. Science has overlooked two immensely salient facts about reality that are not abstruse and to be deduced from analyzing the contents of cyclotrons or the reflectivity data on the moons of Pluto. Science has missed two immensely obvious facts about reality. And here's what they are. The first one is not such a stretch. The first fact is that across all levels of phenomena, atomic, ordinary organic chemistry, biological systems, cultural systems, your life, across all levels of phenomena, the way nature works is that she conserves novelty. What I mean by this is that the universe produces novelty, and then it struggles to maintain it. The universe is a novelty-producing engine of some sort. And the further you move from the birth of the universe, the more novel the universe becomes until you arrive here tonight. This is the most novel moment to date in the history of the universe. It is not only a world of astrophysical forces, or a world of astrophysical forces plus organic chemistry, or astrophysical forces, organic chemistry plus biology. But this is a world that has all the levels of novelty that have accumulated throughout the career of the evolving universe. Each level built on the level which preceded it. And one thing I want to point out about this is that this is the first, if you agree with this, then the first payoff is that suddenly human importance is taken back from the scientific view that we are the chancely evolved witnesses of a meaningless process in an ordinary corner of a universe too vast to conceive or imagine. That incredibly disempowering picture of who we are in the cosmos is misled. The actual facts of the matter are that in our bodies, in our brains, in the culture that we have assembled, all the novelty that preceded us has been exploited and is expressed and is honored. We then begin to look like partners in the project of the production of novelty and more novelty and yet greater novelty. Okay. That's the first fact which science overlooked, the conservation of novelty. The second fact that science overlooked is more of a stretch in terms of the break with the past style of thinking that it requires. The second fact which science overlooked is the fact that each advance into novelty, each new level of novelty occurs faster than the level which preceded it. This is incredibly important because what it means is that the culmination of the novelty-producing process could be far closer to us in time than we might ordinarily suppose using scientific assumptions about reality. And those of you who have heard me before have heard me say, history is the shock wave of eschatology. What that means is that the presence of ourselves on this planet, using culture, using language, transferring information electronically around the world, our presence on the planet means that the universal process of novelty production has entered one of its very short cycles. And so what it means is that asymptotic acceleration of change is built into the structure of space-time itself in this region of the cosmos. History is ending. Time is literally running out on this planet. And it isn't about political mistakes or anything where we should blame ourselves. It's in the structure of the fabric of space-time itself. And the proof of this is ourselves, because the emergence of conscious human beings out of advanced primates occurred with such explosive suddenness that it, like history, argues that we are in the presence of a process that is quickly beginning to accelerate and cross boundary level after boundary level as it bursts through to greater and greater degrees of freedom. So I believe that we are actually preparing to decamp from ordinary history. I don't know exactly what that means, but the continuation of history for decades, centuries, millennia is inconceivable. That is the hallucination of the establishment because it cannot imagine the actual truth of the situation, which is that the cascade of forces set off by Greek science, by the phonetic alphabet, by monotheism, this cascade of social forces is now propelling the entire global social structure into another dimension, literally another dimension. I mentioned the conservation of novelty. Now I want to go back over it from a slightly different point of view. If we analyze the way in which novelty has made its way into being, you see that it has consisted of a kind of conquest of dimensionality. The earliest life forms were probably long-chain polymers or viral particles or something. They were essentially points in the universe. They had no sensorium, no sense of direction, no sexuality, no sense of time. They were basically a point-like toehold in matter by this thing which we call organic existence. Over time, these life forms developed motility, meaning the ability to move, and they literally fumbled their way through a universe that they could not see, dealing with each moment sequentially. But this sequential exploration of space-time represents the first conquest of dimensionality out of the point space. Later, organisms sequestered light-sensitive chemistry on their surfaces and became aware of a gradient of light, which gives the concept here and there, and the possibility of moving toward the light. This is a further conquest of dimensionality. The rest of the whole history of life, up until very recently, then, is the story of producing better organs of locomotion, better fins, better wings, better feet and arms as higher and higher animals arise, ultimately coordinated binocular vision. And then, at that point, rather than the conquest of dimensionality being halted, one particular organism makes an ontogenetic leap to the phenomenon of language. Language is a biological strategy for binding time. Specifically, it's a way of remembering what happened and anticipating what might happen. It explodes the animal consciousness away from the now and creates the incredibly complex web of syntactical and semiotic structures that we know as language. This process is very quickly, compared to previous developments, followed by a second development, the discovery of writing. Now, it's not simply a matter of handing on oral traditions from generation to generation. Suddenly now the freezing of time is a very realistic undertaking. Discourse flows into sign time, signification in clay and stone, and time is frozen. And the triangulation of the future proceeds through the evolution of the kind of mathematics that we see at Stonehenge, and so forth. This unique strategy that the advanced primates created, the strategy of using language to bind time, is what the process we call civilization has been all about. And now, with electronic media, enormous databases, the ability to use Telenet and Usenet and move around the planet from library to library with a few keystrokes, essentially we are completing the program of downloading all of the past into virtual accessibility. And as we do this, we are essentially propelling ourselves into this much ballyhooed domain called cyberspace. Cyberspace is the human transition into a mathematical superspace where we, as a collectivity, become optionally a single point of view. Okay, now, what this all means, then, is that human history and biological evolution, and in fact the entire unfolding of the process of the universe, it is not something pushed from behind, like the falling of a row of dominoes. In other words, the scientific assumption of causal necessity is only part of the story. The universe is under the spell of what I call a transcendental object, or what chaos theory calls an attractor. There is actually a teleological arrow to process. It is being drawn through into ever novel domains, and it spends less time in each domain of novelty until it moves on to the next one. This is what Whitehead called concrescence. It's what it means that in 100 years, we've gone from a world where most people didn't possess telephones to a world where most people can call anywhere in the planet as long as they can afford it. Concrescence, the knitting together, the dissolving of boundaries. This is the key to novelty. Novelty is achieved by the flowing together of domains that were previously separate. They may be the haploid portions of a chromosome, or rich people and poor people, or ravers and travelers, or Marxists and Democrats. The point is, ideas become constipated when they're sealed away from other idea systems. The main thing going on in the 20th century is a dissolving of boundaries. All the boundaries that historical civilization put in place. I mean, what has the past 1,000 years been about, except building class differences, race differences, sexual differences? We've had religious wars, we have factionalism is how we relate to the world, and with the final culmination being the dog-eat-dog vision of nature that we inherit from British natural science in the 19th century. Now, the new metaphor is fusion, union, cross-fertilization, dissolution of boundaries, melding into an enormous stew of virtual and interactive creativity. what this is all leading to, I believe, is, well, what I call the Big Bang. I'm sorry, the big surprise. And as I describe it to you, the reason I said Big Bang is because I want you to remember, as I describe this cosmogony to you, what the competition is peddling. The competition being science and its various handmaidens, capitalism and religion. The competition is telling us that the universe sprang from nothing in a single moment for no reason. Now, whatever you believe about that, notice that it's the limit test for your credulity. If you believe that, you'll believe anything. So keep that in mind as I lead you toward my idea of how it might work. I'm the origins, Big Bang, big seep, slow seep. I don't know. I'm not really that interested. I'm very interested in the here and now. So rather than put a singularity at the beginning of the universe, let's explore what it would be like to put a singularity at the end of time. Then, this seems to me more logical, because what is a singularity? A singularity is a place where all the rules get broken. Well, how could you have a singularity spring from utter nothingness? A singularity seems to me to be the place where complexity becomes so complex that it bursts into another geometric phase space. Therefore, it's more logical that the singularity lies ahead of us in time, not behind us in time. And I believe that, as I said, history is the shock wave of eschatology. What that means is then that us being here tonight in this kind of a city discussing these kind of ideas, this could only occur if the singularity were very, very close in time, ahead of us in the future. So what I look for is a further knitting together, a further acceleration. We are trying to redesign a culture for space/time flight. And if you recall the history of flight, when they were exploring the sound barrier, they designed airplanes which, as they approached the sound barrier, the engineering force called Q, or vibration, would build up along the airfoil. And these machines would be ripped apart in the air until aerodynamic engineers learned how to shape the airfoil, and then some pilot had the nerve with the entire thing just bucking apart to hit the accelerator and push through that barrier to smooth sailing at the other side of Mach 1. This is a perfect model for what we have to do in this culture. We have no idea in 1994 how big the step is that we're preparing to take. We have no idea. It may just be toward sane, safe, reasonable societies. That in itself would be the greatest revolution in human history. But I think it's deeper. I think it's farther. I think we have been summoned out of biology into the world of cultural process only for a moment. And that out of cultural process comes the possibility of mass ascent into a hyperspatial dimension. And you can understand it religiously, you can understand it psychedelically, you can understand it electronically. These are all inadequate and bound to be shown to be very partial. What's happening need not be understood at this point. Rational analytical intelligence, with the amount of data we have at hand, hand, is incapable of modeling what we are headed for. Therefore, what is to be done, and how are we to meet this, and why should you take me seriously in the first place? Unlike these gurus, roshis, rishis, geishas, experts, savants, unlike all of these ideological raps that are being pushed, I advocate an experience, not a belief shift based on the power of rhetoric or argument, but an examination of a domain of experience, specifically the psychedelic experience, which is built in to our genetic potential. Without the psychedelic experience, we are a brutal type of hunting ape. We overcame this pattern a very long time ago on the plains of Africa through shamanism, goddess worship, orgiastic sexuality, and community without material foundation. Unfortunately, this slipped away from us 15, 12,000 years ago, and we fell into history. We fell into the brutal world of urbanism, agriculture, slavery, standing armies, class structure, male kingship, suppression of women, on and on and on, in the absence of the psychedelic experience, which is an open pipeline to homeostatic regulation by the Gaian ecology. If you slip out of that homeostatic regulation, you become an epidemic. You become a plague. You multiply and distort the ecological balance until nature can marshal her forces to drag you back to a reasonable population level. Therefore, in this moment of approaching concrescence, I believe that the way to dispel your own anxiety and the way to become the kind of person who can reassure other people is to psychedelicize yourself. And the reason I believe this is because my model of the psychedelic experience is not that this is the Freudian world of repressed sexual desires and childhood trauma, not that this is the Jungian world of archetypal mythological structures in the psyche, but quite simply that this is what mathematicians have always called a higher dimension, hyperspace. That what has happened, you see, is the mind is a kind of fluid matrix. But consciousness always takes the shape of its container. And if you pour consciousness into a paranoid monkey in a hunting and being hunted environment, consciousness evolves into a threat detection device so that when some saber-toothed tiger is thundering down on you, you know what to do. This is not the kind of world we are living in. And so what we can do is recast consciousness, recast the mind by melting away the constipated structures of positivism, reductionism, materialism, capitalism, mediaism, consumer fetishism. Melt all that away and let the mind assume a new geometry in a higher spatial dimension. This is possible, this is happening, and I believe it's a collective destiny. But I also believe that one can jump the gun with psychedelics You don't have to wait till 2012. You don't have to wait until the moment of total concrescence of the collectivity. You can be ahead of the curve by beginning yourself to explore these kinds of dimensions. Beyond that, I think we should be very careful in any kind of political agenda. I'm very mistrustful of hortatory, oratory, and political agendas, and you should be too. So recently, this came up for me because Boing Boing magazine contacted me and said, we want to do an issue about what should be done between now and the end of time. And will you contribute? And they said, and we know you think people should take psychedelics, so would you please say something new? The pressure for novelty reaches even here. So I thought about it, but I didn't like the concept of what you should do. I think it's the should mentality that we need to avoid. The idea that there is a program, a set of actions, a kind of obligation to act. Because I have been reassured over and over again by the mushroom, you don't know enough to worry. You don't have enough data on your plate to make the egocentric act of commitment that worry implies. Worry implies responsibility. Are you serious? So then I thought about it, and I'm a great fan of the negative theology of Nicholas Cusanus, who said God can only be defined by negatives. God is not this, God is not that. So here is a laundry list open for criticism and not to be taken as anything more than a working position, but here are some ideas about how to bring the culture through. And mostly they are in the form of what I call negatively affirmative acts. Number one, do not kill. This is obvious, but it needs to be said in a world filled with Rwandas, Bosnias, and what have you. Do not kill. The second thing, do not believe. Ideology is poisonous. This scene is not an ideology. It's the celebration of an experience that you have, sometimes while dancing, sometimes while loaded, sometimes while screwing, and it is not about ideology. All ideology is poisonous. It's not about picking the good ones from the bad ones. It's a vampirical exercise. What we want to do is put emphasis on the felt presence of immediate experience. The body, the soul, the mind, the brain, the genitals. We want to reclaim our bodies and our minds. Do not, therefore, believe. Because if you believe something, you preclude your possibility of believing in its opposite, and you have begun to deal away your freedom. Ideology has poisoned the cultural enterprise. So that's the first concept. The second follows naturally from that. Do not follow. Do not follow. Nobody has a clue what's going on. Do you think somebody knows what's going on? Me, Sogyal Rinpoche, the Dalai Lama, the Pope, the World Bank, everybody is just groping. Nobody ever figured it out, and nobody has figured it out to date. You are all all of these people that you respect, that you think are somewhere else in space and time. Information is non-local. Your thoughts are no less profound than the most profound thoughts being thought on the planet. You are a fractal embodiment of the species. You don't need to ask anybody. You need to consult with your friends. You need to be open to discussion, but we do not believe because it limits the horizons of possibility. The next thing that occurred to me in this little mental exercise is do not, to the best of your ability, consume. Do not consume. It is acts of consumption that are destroying the planet. A rather interesting spin-off from this position is we should all become much more sensitive to antiques. Antiques have already been created. Everything should be recycled. This should be easy to do here. The whole country appears to be an antique shop. Do not consume. Create. Energy is flowing two ways in any social contract. And the way it flows in the crypto-fascist, pseudo-democratic industrial democracies is from the media down. Don't buy it. Create it. Make your own news. Remember in Citizen Kane where Hearst says to someone, I don't read the news, I make it. This should be everyone's attitude. The news is just the ravings of the diseased intellect at the unhinged helm of the sinking ship of Western assumptions. Forget it. The next thing, perhaps seeming mildly off the mark, but I think important, don't get dressed. It's unnecessary to get dressed more than to keep yourself from freezing and catching a touch of flu. Getting dressed is an act of cultural enslavement to an incredibly deep programming that is about maintenance of social boundaries. Covering ourselves up inhibits the flow of social pheromones. We are essentially armored against each other. Next point, do not multiply. Do not multiply. This goes with the consumer thing. Replace yourself. I've talked before here about the one woman, one child concept and how the Earth's population would drop by half in 40 years if that were to be adopted by women around the world, and that because the children of the women of the pseudo-democracies are the great consumers, 1,000-fold greater consumers than children born in the third world, this one woman, one child thing should be preached in the pseudo-democracies because their postmodern women are open to this message. They're educated to the planetary circumstance. They can hear that the limitation of their commitment to childbearing is the way not only to lower the population of the planet, but to free them to take a much larger role in society. Because classically, women have been kept from full roles in society by keeping them raising endless children. And even, I think, two is too many. We need to drop the population of the planet. All social schemes founder in the presence of the burgeoning growth of population. The other thing is, if we're serious about an archaic reformation, an archaic revival, a fusion of technoculture with Aboriginal impulses, then I think we have to recognize the fact that the sexual ratios in modern societies are a product of monogamite ideology, and that among primates, the usual sexual ratio is more 70-30 female to male. It is wrong to try and feminize society by feminizing men. Men are not feminine. Men are men. That needs to be celebrated as well. So if we've made a decision that feminine values would serve us all better as a culture now, then the way to do that is to lower the number of males in the society through manipulating insurance policy, amniocentesis, so forth and so on. A ratio of 70-30 would create the social revolution we're talking about if, in other words, what I'm suggesting is every woman in the pseudo-democracies have one child, and 75% of those children, or 70% of those children, should be female. Because I believe, and you don't have to buy this, I mean, you're you, I'm me, but I believe that the post-industrial family unit is simply a manufacturing device for neurosis, agony, maladaption, and hatred. And that if we're serious about replacing the family unit, if we're serious about going tribal, if we're serious about archaism, feminism, psychedelic agendas, then we have to bring on these experimental social forms. And it seems to me very obviously that we are going to damage our masculine psyche if we do not give men equal honor with women, and the only way to do that is to lower their overall numbers. So these are the kinds of ideas that are in circulation. Culture is trying to take a leap, and each wave crashes on the beach with a certain amount of cultural impact. It begins with Alfred Jarry. It begins with the Impressionists. It goes through the Dadas, Surrealism, Abstract Expressionism, the Beatniks, the Hippies, Jazz, Cubism. Each one of these cultural movements within the 20th century has tried to bring back into Western experience hope, union of mind and body, celebration of sexuality, and celebration of the imagination. And each of these cultural waves has had a certain degree of success. It has conserved a certain degree of novelty and has built a platform for the next wave. Now, in 1994, with the calendar as an extra tailwind at our back, we can use the millennium and the experience of the freaks, the surrealists, Marxism, all of this experience now must be distilled to anticipate the transcendental object at the end of time. It is drilling toward us like French engineers under the English Channel. We must be drilling toward it. It is trying to sculpt us in its image. To the degree that we can anticipate its desire, we can reconstruct the airfoil of culture. We can overcome the vibratory forces that are attempting to separate us, tear us apart, and reduce the human experience to a fascist anthill. But the way to do this is to pull back, trust yourself, trust your friends, build community, work with plants. Do not involve yourself with pyramidal conspiracies involving white powder drugs. This was what undid the scene in the 60s. Stay with the flow. Unleash the imagination. Put the art pedal to the floor. Realize that your understanding is, for you, the state of the art, and that you have to trust your judgment, trust your intuition, trust feeling. Boundaries are being dissolved. This can be experienced as a tearing, a rending, a drowning, a struggle, or it can be experienced as exaltation, freedom, ecstasy, light, life. We are the inheritors of 1,000,000 years of conscious dreaming, 1,000,000 years of sitting around the campfire, watching the setting of the stars on the distant horizon. We are the psychedelic people who made the prodigal journey through the labyrinth of history. We now must, at the center of that labyrinth, slay the dragon, seize the alchemical pearl, and escape into the hyperspatial paradise that lies beyond the historical journey into limitation. This is our destiny. It's our bequeathment from the past. It's a trust, a responsibility, a sacred act that will recover the meaning of history. Otherwise, history is a tale told by a madman, full of sound and fury, signifying nothing. And that is too horrible a thing to contemplate. Nobody dropped the ball preceding us. There were ice ages. There were epidemics. There were famines. There were volcanic eruptions. There were tidal waves. Nobody dropped the ball. And now we are, in a sense, in the position of the Renaissance magicians, the position they dreamed of. We're in a position to act in consort with the will of nature to complete what nature has begun, to fuse our restless intelligence, our technologies, with the intent of nature, and to open a doorway into immortality. This is actually a possibility, and the proof of it is the content of the psychedelic experience when deeply, honestly, and consistently explored. Thank you very much for putting up with all of this. If we had a DMT molecule here and we blew it up, it would be flat. It's what's called a planar molecule. It would look sort of like an irregular but flat shape. So then DNA, which has the genetic code for all life in it, is built like a ladder, a helix. Well, a very interesting and not much discussed fact, except by me and my brother, is the fact that these psychedelic molecules are structurally perfectly designed to slip right in between the nucleotides of DNA. Why should this be? No one knows, but this is called a dimer. And many dimers exist, but most dimers, when they slip into the DNA, they distort it. They physically twist it out of alignment. The psychedelic molecules, especially psilocybin, seem to be able to slip in and out of there, and they're such a perfect fit that they don't distort it. So it looks to me like an evolved relationship, a key and lock relationship. Well, is it possible then that the memory is stored somehow in the DNA? You remember, there are vast segments of the DNA which do not appear to be dedicated to genetic transcription of proteins. These have always been dismissed by science, the so-called silent sequences. But the silent sequences may not be designed to be read by a ribosome to produce a protein. The silent sequences of DNA may be, in fact, encoded information of the sort of information you and I think of as information. And when the drug molecule fits in there, it broadcasts an expanded electron spin resonance signal off the molecule, and this is the psychedelic experience. It's being conducted into the Akashic memory banks where all this DNA-coded information is happening. The fact is, that's pure speculation, and there are many molecular biologists who would sneer at it, but they're not on as secure ground as they suppose. If there is one issue in the past 40 years that science has failed utterly to make any progress on, it's the question of memory. No one understands how it works, and the best models to date are completely inadequate to the data. So I believe that the game is not in on this, and it would make a certain amount of sense, wouldn't it? The psychedelic experience sort of is like experiencing a vast blast of memory data. Those of you who have done it, have you noticed the weird, now I'm an infant again aura that sometimes attends it? I mean, when I do DMT, I actually feel my body proportions become infantile. I feel my head get bigger and my legs shrink. I mean, it's only a part of the experience. You have to notice it, but it seems to me very suggestive that we are actually entering hyperspace. You are experiencing yourself your whole life, not just now, but back. There's lots of work to be done, yes.
Does the intensity of DMT experience diminish when you take it with MAO inhibitors and you extend it?
Does the DMT experience diminish when you take it with MAO inhibitors? I would think that you might lock it in at a fairly high level of intensity.
Does it carry on for
Yes, it does. It definitely does. Be sure you're prepared before you try that stuff.
Other people I know have tried DMT and had ordinary trippy experiences, e.g. aliens, doors opening. No one has had these vast experiences you describe. Could it all be in the mind and you see these things because you have a wide scientific, academic background in your head already? Good question.
Well, the thing about DMT is that it does make a certain demand of courage, and the leather-lunged smokers among us are in a superior position. The difference between 1 toke and 2 is enormous. The difference between 2 tokes and 3 is staggering. So you have to push it. And I believe that it's quite safe. I mean, people say, is it dangerous? And you know my answer. Only if you fear death by astonishment. But that's not a joke. Death by astonishment doesn't seem like such an unlikely proposition when you're out there. So, you know, you sort of have to gauge. A friend of mine once said of DMT, he said, every time I do it, I try to stand more. And that's what it's like, because ultimately it is going to overwhelm your intellectual machinery. If it doesn't blow it out in the first 30 seconds, it will blow it out later, because ultimately the mind fails. The descriptive apparatus melts, the measuring instruments are vaporized, and the thing is just what it is. So you want to proceed carefully, but with courage, And if your friends tell you you're getting nutty, you should listen to them, because it does have a tendency to magnify inflationary images in the psyche. In other words, if you're not flawlessly solid, it will act like an X-ray of just where the fault lines lie in your particular worldview. This question is, do you believe that it is necessary to be in a certain mind space before entering a trip to give maximum effect? Well, it's very simple. It's 6 hours without food and silent darkness, telephones unplugged, comfortable, reassuring environment. That's all. It's not about tanks, and it's not about social situations like this that are dense with noise, people, pheromones, social signaling. I mean, it would rip you apart, a really deep trip. I think let's not underrate cannabis, for crying out loud. I think cannabis should be the glue of the community. It's really important to go botanical, to be as botanically psychedelic as possible. You see, the very best of the white powder drugs are still impossible to verify as to purity and source. So it's just a fool's game. The plants will not play you false. So I think that's very important.
Do you think the industrial political system will be able to manipulate consciousness through technology, biotelemetry implants, and prevent our minds evolving and accepting the transcendental object?
Well, this thing about fearing technology in any form, what you got to understand is when you go into these places like Autodesk and Silicon Graphics and like that, you have the suits above the 20th floor. But everybody below the 20th floor has hair down to their ass, is heavily tattooed, pierced, they're rocking. So we own this technology. They do not understand it. You know, it was a miracle that Richard Nixon could erase 19 and a half minutes on a tape recorder and get it right. They have to pay us to run their technology. They can't write code. They can't run the nets. It belongs to us. And I see this trend simply accelerating. The technical community is by no means part of the opposition. The technical community is going to be there when we reach the barricades.
What kind of music or sound, if any, would you use for DMT? And also, what does DMT sound like?
What kind of music would I use with DMT? Well, I have done DMT with music, but I've regretted it nearly every time. I've done it with Locatelli's Violin Concerto Number 11. That was a long, and the reason these are not contempo deals is because I haven't done it with music for 30 years because it alarmed me. I did it with Karl-Heinz Stockhausen, and that really alarmed me. As far as what DMT sounds like, it sounds, well, somewhat like this. And then, of course, there's that's the kind of sucking, pulling thing that happens as you tumble down these disystolic organismic hallways that are pulling and tugging you forward. And then, of course, you get in, at least for me, into what I call the elk hive. And then there is, for me and for some people, I mean, it hits people differently. I saw a woman not long ago, it was very interesting, have the most amazing orgasm I've ever seen. And I've seen a lot of people do DMT, and this just left everybody's jaw hanging. This woman, a very nondescript sort of person, but she certainly got on. And she was saying during it, "Don't send me back. I can't leave you. I can't leave you." What happens to me in reference to the sound thing is language. I see elves, sort of, dribbling self-jeweled basketballs, but the main activity at the higher doses is that these autonomous machine elf soul creatures make objects with language. They somehow, language in the DMT state is transduced through the eyes. You see syntax, and you are in fact impelled to join with them in these long, spontaneous bursts of language-like activity that sound sort of like this.
So what holds us together, or do we just let go? Will we become insane in the conventional meaning?
No, we'll redefine sanity. We'll carry the definition with us. This is what's insane. The city outside, and the governments and the institutions. We won't become insane. We are awakening. This is what's happening. The long nightmare of human history that James Joyce talked about. We are awakening. And the truth you think you see, the truth of your own intuition is the truth. You don't need somebody on high. You simply have to open your eyes. You know, if it looks like horse shit, if it talks like horse shit, if it walks like horse shit. No, I'm an absolute optimist. I am absolutely certain, as I stand before you, that everything is on track. I mean, the mushroom has said, this is what it's like when a species prepares to depart for the galactic center. This is what planets come into existence for. This is, we are about to part ourselves from the placenta of three-dimensional space. Information is rearing itself up and preparing to take a step into another dimension. Everything is changing. Everything always has been changing. But now it is changing so quickly that within the confines of an individual life, the entire cosmic drama, it can be encapsulated. We are each fractal histories of the universe. It is within us as a community, as individuals. Nothing can stop this. This is not a political movement. This is as inevitable as continental drift or the sunspot cycle. You know, it is now time to decamp from three-dimensional space. 15,000 years ago, it was time for the descent from the garden into history, to take hold of the tools that will allow us to free our minds, our bodies, our planet, our identity, our destiny. This is what it's all been about.
What chance do you think the Zippy Tour of America has to inspire American youth culture?
Well, we're fighting a meme war here, aren't we? We have to use the media to prosecute our agenda. The other side has all the guns, all the money. The only problem is, if they win, everybody dies. So our friend is the information transfer network, the media. We have to set in motion memes, models that will attract loyalty. Remember last year I quoted William Blake, and I said, if the truth can be told so as to be understood, it will be believed. It's as simple as that. The obligation on us is to communicate the truth so that it is understood. The belief will take care of itself. And, I'm all for this zippy thing. It's a high-stakes game because a stumble will delay the agenda. But I've been coming to Britain now for 5 years, and each time I've seen this scene expand, broaden, deepen, and I've seen its resolve coalesce. And I think it's now to take this thing on the road. You know, America's undergoing the illusion of a liberal administration. I think we need to strike at the great beast before Ross Perot takes over.
We're getting near the end. After Terence, what's his name then? Afterwards, we're going to have a Tibetan healing doctor upstairs in the Technosound suite. There'll also be Terence's latest book and some of the older ones last year for me. Also will be at sale up there, and he'll probably be doing some signing after about 11:30. All right. Well, they're coming in thick and fast. Where's the Millennium? We'll try the one with the Millennium now.
I don't know what's up there. Invisible landscape.
It's all around you.
Invisible landscape is all around you. It's also out in America now, but I don't know if anybody's imported it into Britain yet. It is out. It's great. I'm very happy with it. I'm ready to retire at this point. My message is essentially done once that book is available.
Yeah, this is what I want to get behind. Your views seem to be typically millenniumism. Seem to be typically millenniumism. I.e. the year 2000 shapes consciousness. What do you think? I've often wondered, I want to get Terence to get behind the year 2000, not the year 2012. Because I think we can't agree about the year 2000. What the hell are we ever going to agree about, you know?
Well, I'm not so. If you look at the time wave, you'll see that the year 2000 is lined up with events in Christian history so hysterical that we might as well hand it over to them. They're going to dance on that. And I think that after that confirmation, we will be able to talk seriously about the millennium.
I have read that you have some form of algorithm formula to predict, model the fractal course of history. Is this so? Could you describe it? Could you demonstrate it?
Well, you have to lean on Fraser for that. I mean, I have a very broad career, and as a mathematician with an interest in computer modeling of history, I didn't think I should come before you tonight and flay everybody with that. If you're interested, my book, The Invisible Landscape, which is out in the States and hopefully will shortly be out here, deals with that. One of the things that I like about me is that a lot of my ideas are very hard to communicate to crowds. So if you want to understand that side of it, you're going to have to dig into the books. It's the fact that these ideas go so deep. You know, the chaos mathematics of Ralph Abraham, the morphogenetic field of Rupert Sheldrake. This movement has philosophical depth. This is not a mob in the streets. This is a new model of reality from the ground up. We have our philosophers, our scientists, our thinkers, our musicians, our artists, our organizers, our spokesmen. It goes deep. This is not a fad, and we shouldn't let it become that. We shouldn't let it be co-opted by the fashion fascists and the fad fascists and the tabloids and all that horseshit. This is not fashion, folks. This is the real thing.
80% of that, Mark.
I was going to note here saying actually it's already 2,537 in Buddhist, the way they count it. But I think that's the whole point. I mean, everybody's got their own date. If we can't agree on the year 2000, and after all, that was set up by all Christian Western things to that. Tomorrow. No, we need a little more time. Do you know of any plant species containing DMT worth extracting in the UK? I have lots of specific drug questions, but I'm not going to do them because that's an individual case. That's a general one. DMT.
This question about a DMT containing plant in the British Isles. I don't know the flora of the British Isles, but I suspect that the grass genus Phalaris, probably Phalaris tuberosa, Phalaris arundinacea. I imagine these are plants of English pasturage, just like they are in North America. In any case, there are many DMT plants containing plants which would grow in Britain outside. For example, Desmantha selenoensis. And I really urge you to explore Salvia divinorum because, as I pointed out, it can be done in public. Oh, if anyone wants Salvia divinorum, there's a pile of leaflets at the front of the stage. No trampling. No. What, are you crazy, Fraser? Are you still up?
Very much. In A.T. Mann's book, Millennium Prophecies, he gives a paragraph referring to what you were saying about time speeding up, the quickening, coming to such a point that at 2012, 2013, we're going to be getting into cosmic jumps in consciousness down to the second and on. Can you speak about that, please?
The question is about this acceleration of time that is part of this approach to the transcendental object. Let me explain what we're talking about here. I'll just get a little bit into my model, some of the deeper stuff. My mathematical formalism causes me to believe that the universe is of the following nature. It's a series of nested cycles, and the largest of these cycles is 72 billion years long, much longer than ordinary science feels it needs for the life of the cosmos, which is about 20 billion years, give or take. I say it's much older than that. It's about 72 billion years old. And the way it works is it's a series of nested cycles, and each cycle is 1/64th of the larger cycle which preceded it. So we know if we have a 72 billion year cycle that that's enough time for the whole universe to happen in. On the other end of the time scale, we have what is called Planck's constant, 6.55 times 10 to the minus 23rd erg seconds, technically known as a jiffy. So we go from 72 billion years to 1 jiffy. Now, if you take 72 billion and divide it by 64, and divide that by 64, and divide that by 64, it requires 26 divisions to get to a jiffy. Now, how long do you think the time span is when you're halfway between 72 billion years and 1 jiffy? The answer is an hour and 35 minutes. What that means then is that in the kind of cosmos I'm describing to you, half of the universe's unfolding occurs in the last hour and 35 minutes of its existence. This is what I call the big surprise. And it is no more outlandish than what science is preaching, which is that there were these very brief eras of physics at the beginning of the universe. The Hadron era and so forth and so on. I don't buy that. I think that there will come a day when there will be more progress toward the revelation of the unspeakable than has occurred in the previous life of this universe. And I am standing up here before you telling you this day will come in the lifetime of most of us here tonight. The presence of electronic culture, the presence of global civilization indicates that we are into the short domains of novelty and are soon to be drawn down by the spin dizzy of the attractor so deep into the expression of novelty that human imagination as presently constituted will be completely inadequate. We can only anticipate this state through psychedelic exploration and prayerful contemplation, because this is the attractor at the end of time, the thing which has pulled all novelty, all progress, all process toward itself in a progressive, self-revealing process for billions of years. That's the kind of cosmos we're living in, and we are central players in it. We are the lost children of the Logos that are being pulled back to the higher hidden source of being. The lower dimensional prodigal trip through the bardos of space, time, matter, and energy are ending. And we are within reach of fusion of the past and the present with the transcendental object at the end of time. And it's for each of us simply to anticipate that, to reflect upon that, and use it as a source of joy and courage. Thank you very much.
Terence was talking about boundary dissolving. The most intense boundary dissolving experiment going on right now on the planet happens every Sunday here at Megatripolis' Sunday thing from 4 o'clock. I'm not joking. From 4 o'clock to 2 in the morning, I believe, or maybe it's 3 in the morning. We're pushing that envelope. That's every Sunday, the Sunday thing. From 4 o'clock. There's kids in the back room. Everything's happening there. It's really boundary dissolving. We're going to have a Tibetan